Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Katie Higgins. I am a senior lecturer in adult nursing in a university in Manchester, but my background is I'm an advanced clinical practitioner. I worked out in general practice and then into the wider community, but I'm a health visitor by background and a registered adult nurse as well. So a lot of my knowledge as a health visitor I'm going to share with you this evening, but that knowledge I really built on when I worked in general practice as an ACP as well. Child development is important to us all. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this presentation tonight. Just to add on, a couple of months ago, I think it was September time, I did child development 0 to 2 years. So if you haven't seen that yet, I definitely recommend logging on and watching that. And this is just a follow-on really from 2 to 5 years old. So the things I'm going to cover this evening is I'm going to discuss the factors that impact on child development. I'm going to discuss the main stages and developmental milestones from 2 to 5 years old. I'm going to look at development in 5 different areas, and that's going to be physical, cognitive, social, emotional, and language. And I'm going to discuss on what's meant by school readiness, and that's something that we used in health visiting in school nursing as well, about making sure that children are ready for school, because essentially that's what we want. We want to get them to that point that all our children are ready for school for when they start in reception. Okay, so why is child development important? So children develop faster in childhood than they do at any point in their lives. Some children do have developmental needs, which are likely to develop into special educational needs once they enter education if support services are not accessed. So if a child, for example, has a developmental need that's not addressed, then that's likely going to continue into those educational years. And the sooner we get support in for those children, so the sooner that we address it, get support service in, parental support, the earlier we can try and improve that developmental problem or that developmental delay and get that addressed. So when they start school, that's either resolved or it's supported when they enter school education. Some children may have disabilities and don't follow the usual kind of projection of child development. So therefore, diagnosing early developmental delays can improve long-term outcomes. And it also helps to ensure parents and carers are given the right support, the right information to help them support that child, because we want to improve those long-term outcomes, but making sure that children have the best start in life and the best, they're able to reach their potential. We can do that by supporting development in our roles. Okay, so I put this slide up because I thought this was really interesting. So this looks at the brain development in children. So there is a big emphasis in the first year of life. So if you have a look there on the chart, we've got an increased kind of brain development in relation to sensory pathways, language and cognition in that first year. And it does start to tail off slowly in the early years. So if you look from 1 to 5, it is tailing off, but that cognition stays quite high, and that's that problem solving ability. And then as a child gets older, so they get into that school years and they go into teenage years, it does start to slow down. And this is quite significant when you think of some of the highly publicised safeguarding cases where children have been in very neglectful environments. And if they're not kind of supported to reach their full potential in their development in those early months and those early years of life, it can often be quite difficult for that young person, that teenager, to kind of build on that development. So that the key area really essentially is in those first years of life. That's when the brain's growing, we're getting the connections in the brain, and that hardwire connection in relation to doing those kind of milestones of development. So it's really important we get those early years right from the start, because that's what the research is showing us. The earlier you intervene, that is the optimum prime for child development. So when we talk about child development, there's also lots of other factors that can influence development. So it's not just straightforward, every child develops at a certain rate. There are lots of different things that impact. These are the main things. So things like genetics. So, is a child more susceptible to disease or disorders? Sometimes it lies in the family lines and the genetics. So it's important that is that's something that can impact on development. Nutrition as well. So nutrition is needed for healthy physical development, brain development, and for healthy immune systems. So, if a child's not having access to the correct nutrition, that can have a massive impact. Now, in the UK, what we recommend is children are given a multivitamin up to the age of 5. Particularly in vitamin A, D, and C. Vitamin D in the UK, we don't get enough vitamin D from our sunlight. So that's why we recommend a supplement for children because of the increased risk of rickets. So all children should be on a multivitamin, but just bearing in mind, nutrition has a huge impact on development as well for healthy bones, motor development, cognition, and that type of thing. Physical activity. So the more physical activity that children are getting exposed to, they're likely they're going to meet those developmental milestones. So physical activity comes into play when we're talking about coordination, balance, strength, all those things. Family dynamic can also play a huge impact, and this is when we're thinking about our safeguarding families. There was some studies, I think in the 1970s and 1980s, which kind of looked at brains of children who were in very neglectful situations and children who had healthy dynamics and kind of good outcomes in the families that they lived in, and the children that were exposed to high neglect had smaller brains than those children that had that nurturing environment. So whether the child's got positive kind of family interaction and nurturing caregiver has a massive impact on cognition and brain development. So we just need to be mindful of that as well. And that's why it's important with child safeguarding that we intervene early, because it has a massive impact on how that child may develop. Cultural beliefs. So inclusive cultures are more likely to have children who are more accepting, more tolerant, and more confident. So that can impact on child development in compared to very rigid kind of cultural beliefs. And of course, our access to education and healthcare. Education is essential for all areas of development for children. And again, access to healthcare as well, making sure our children are able to access healthcare. Just grab a drink. So when we talk about child development, it's really important to notice that development isn't linear. We've got lots of different unique children in our care. Not all children always develop at the same rates as others. So even though I'm going to go through the milestones with you, don't see this as kind of solid gold. There's lots of factors that impact on child development, and we just need to recognise that every child is different, and we have lots of diversities in our kind of our communities and that type of thing. So I'm going to start by looking at our toddlers and just give you a quick run through of what development looks like in a toddler, a 2-year-old, a child of 24 months. So when we look at social emotional development, what we'd be expecting our toddlers to do would be to start to notice when others are hurt or upset. So they start to notice the world around them and emotion of other children or other adults. Children of this age may look at a caregiver's face when they're looking of how to react in an unknown situation. So they're very much kind of getting that awareness of others around them rather than oneself. When we look at language and communication development, we'd be expecting our 2-year-olds to kind of be using 2 words together. So things like more milk, mummy more, those type things. So 2 words together is kind of a milestone for development in our 2-year-olds. And that's something that we look at 2-year checks as well. We're checking to see whether children are putting those 2 words together rather than just using a single word. And again, lots of different things can impact on this. So, for example, if a child's got, has frequent ear infections, they have glue ear, the hearing might not be as kind of sharp as a child that didn't. And sometimes they can have muffled hearing. So there's lots of different things that can impact on development. But I think usually we give them to about 2.5. And if they're not putting 2 words together at that point, then we might think about further referrals or maybe some more investigations to why the child's not putting 2 words together. We'd be expecting children to be able to point to 2 body parts when asked. So we ask them things like, can you show me where your eyes are? Where's your tummy? Those type of things. So we'd be expecting that communication development to be really started to develop at this point. Cognition, so that problem solving ability, so being able to kind of use 2 hands to open up a jar, using kind of switches or knobs or kind of buttons on toys, and playing with more than 1 toy at a time. So for example, putting food, toy food onto a plate, so kind of using two toys together. When we look at those motor skills for that physical development, we'd be looking at children can kick a ball and run, can jump off the floor, so both feet up together, and starting to kind of eating with a spoon when they're sat at the table, or using a pencil, holding a pencil, using a thumb and the first 2 fingers, so getting that kind of pincer grasp when kind of using pencils and crayons and that type of thing. Now, around the 2-year mark is when we start to introduce kind of the idea of potty training. Now, this may be a touchy subject in the audience. If we've got any parents, give me a thumbs up if you're there in the audience. So potty training, we start to see lots of thumbs up there. We start to introduce it at 2 years. So some children, and again, we just need to be mindful that every child is different. And if we're not expecting all children to be completely potty trained at 2, but it's around the 2-year mark that we start to introduce this to parents. So some children are early, some children are able to be kind of independent of the process around 18 months, and some children are a little bit later, more at the 3 years or even past the 3 years. Now, the standard advice that generally that we give to parents when we're talking about potty training is that children tend to open their bowels or go for a wee or pass urine when they wake up after a drink or meal, and sometimes that's a good time to start to introduce them to the potty. So after they've eaten, put them on the potty, or after they've got up from a nap, that type of thing, to introduce the idea. And again, with small children, positive reinforcement, encouragement, explanation, and play are really important factors when it comes to potty training. And again, it's about following your child's patterns and cues. Some parents would say that, it's better to do it in the summer months. However, we don't advise to delay just because of the time of year. And the most important thing is praise when it comes to this type of thing. But again, every child's different. We start to talk about it in child health clinics around 2, but some children can be slightly earlier and some children can be later as well. Feeding on from that, nocturnal enuresis, so bedwetting at night, usually happens within a few months of becoming dry during the day. But again, we do see a huge variation of this as well. There's no kind of rule of thumb with this. Nighttime bladder control can take a little bit longer to achieve, but most children are usually dry at night by the age of 5. And there are risk factors associated with it. So children are more likely to bedwet if there's a family history. So that we used to see that lots and lots I saw that in general practice, but also in my health visiting clinics as well. There usually is a strong family history. Unfortunately, our little boys are more likely to be bedwetters than little girls. So there's a ratio of about 2 to 1 to little boys. Obesity can sometimes be a factor when they've looked at the risk factors for enuresis. and things like psychological or behavioural disorders, so things like ADHD, autism, those type of things can sometimes be associated with an increased risk of bedwetting. Now, if you do come across a child or a parent that's concerned that the child's over the age of 5 and we've still got some bedwetting going on, it depends on the impact, really. So if it's less than twice a week, we can use the watch and wait approach up to the age of 7 and give them reassurance. But there's lots of other treatment options as well. So in some areas, depending on where you work, you may have a continence service. So for children over 5, you might want to refer them to the continence nurses who will give them some extra advice and support. So the obvious things like avoiding drinks before bed, making sure you've got good toileting routines during the day, assessment of bowels, because sometimes constipation can play a part in it as well. So depends on where you work, you may be able to refer to a continence service. If not, then it's just advice through the GP, really. And there are medications as well that they can put children on, and kind of bedwetting alarms and that type of thing. So there's support out there for parents. But usually, as a rule of thumb, most children by 5, but around 7 really is the cutoff for that, for enuresis. Now, I just thought I'd put this on there in relation to childcare for 2-year-olds. And again, this is just for children that live in England. So I know we've got people from all over today, but I thought this was quite important for practitioners who are working in England. So 2-year-olds are, if their parent is in receipt of benefit or low income families, so I've put a list on the slide here, can access a 2-year nursery place, so free childcare for those parents. And this also includes looked after children and children that have an educational healthcare plan. And the reason for this is, and why the government has introduced this, is that we want to get children ready for school. There are high numbers of children that aren't developmentally ready or haven't met those developmental milestones by the time they reach reception. And research shows children that live in kind of more deprived areas, those poorer areas, are more likely to not be school ready. So one way of combating that is by introducing this free childcare place for 2-year-olds to help families, but to make sure that children are reaching their full potential as well. So that's why the 2-year child place was introduced in England, to support children in those deprived areas, to get them geared up for school, to get them school ready, to get them on top of their developmental milestones in nursery places. So that's essentially one of the reasons of why that 2-year child place was introduced. So if any of you are working with families or working with children, and that asking, do they attend nursery, or noticed a family who are really struggling and they may be in receipt of these things on the slide, then it might be a recommendation that you say, do you know about the 2-year child place that you could access to try and help and support that child reach their full potential. Okay, so moving on to the 2.5 years. So what we'd be expecting our children to be kind of reaching when we look at social and emotional development is that they may kind of play next to children and sometimes starting to play with other children around them, able to follow simple routines when told, so things like helping picking up toys around the house. Still at this age, though, they're still very dependent on their caregiver and often require reassurance in unsure situations. When we look at communication and language development, at this age, they usually have about 200 words in their vocabulary, starting to put more words together. So they may put 3 words together with action words as well. So things like doggy run, mummy walk, those type things. So starting to link 2 other words together, and can name things in a book when asked. So, if you were to open a book and read a book with a child, you say, what's this? They're able to describe that to you. When we look at cognitive development, with that kind of problem-solving ability, they start to engage in role play a little bit. So, feeding a doll food, that type of thing. We'll show some simple problem solving skills. So things like standing on a small stool to reach something, and will recognise themselves in a photograph as well. So starting to kind of build those kind of cognitive pathways in relation to problem solving. When we look at physical development, can throw a ball, can stand and walk on tippy toes if shown. And again, when we're looking at those fine motor skills, able to turn pages in a book one at a time when you read together as well. Now, in my clinic, I would often have lots of parents coming to see me around this kind of toddler age with behavioural problems and mainly being temper tantrums. So again, parents in the audience, give me a thumbs up if you've experienced a temper tantrum from your little one around the terrible twos. Lots of thumbs up there in the audience. Yeah. And lots of laughing faces as well, although not at the time. We can look back now and laugh at it. So temper tantrums usually start around 18 months of age and can continue up until the age of 4. So by the time a child's 4, they're less common, although they can still happen. They usually start to tail off as a child starts to be able to express their emotions more and able to vocalize what they want more. And they are linked to expression and frustration, particularly in those early years. If you think, the language isn't quite there, at 2 years old, only kind of putting 2 words together. So they are linked to frustration. Sometimes can be associated with hitting, biting, kicking, that type of thing. Sometimes children can kick and bite other children, which isn't related to a temper tantrum. And sometimes it can just be linked to kind of toddlers are curious when we're talking about that kind of aggressive behaviour, and they might not understand or have that developmental understanding that biting and pulling hair hurts. And when we think about, child development, only really at 2 are they starting to really notice emotions in other people. So they haven't really got that understanding that might hurt another child in a younger kind of a 2-year-old compared to a kind of a 3 and a 4-year-old. And again, with temper tantrums, it's just about kind of acknowledging with your child that they're upset, because it's frustration of why they're feeling like that, but also kind of giving them an open space for them to run about, scream and express themselves in other ways as well, when they're feeling upset, helping your child understand, there are other ways to kind of express and get that anger and those emotions out as well. And praise. With a lot of parenting advice and instructions, a lot of it is around praising good behaviour. Really making a fuss of when a child is showing those kind of good skills and that type of thing, and trying to ignore some of the negative or negative behaviour that you might see as well. Okay, so moving on to our 3-year-olds. So by 3, we've started to come on a little bit when we look at the social and emotional development. So notices other children and joins to play them. So in the 2 years, we saw that was building, but by 3, that should have firmed up now to where they want to play and join in with other children. And again, they may start to join in with make-believe as well with other children. So superheroes and princesses are really common around this age, the life of a nursery teacher. Language, when we look at communication development, so that kind of would expect a little bit more of that kind of that to and back and forth exchange, those little conversations. So and a lot of questions around who, what, why, when, where's mummy and daddy, those type things. They're able to say actions is happening in an action book. So, if somebody's running, they're able to point that out and communicate what that action is. So if a child's playing in a picture book, they're able to point out and recognise that child's playing. When we look at cognitive development, they will be able to kind of draw circles, able to match colours, and that movement development. So being able to walk upstairs, alternative feet, and cuts, that those fine motor skills, able to cut things with toy scissors as well. So really getting kind of those fine motor skills as well. Now, in England, all children, when they reach 3, are offered a 30-hour free childcare offer. Now, this is increasing from April 2024. So parents of 2-year-olds, all parents of 2-year-olds, so not just those in receipt of benefits, will be able to access 15 hours of free childcare. So that's something that's coming in from April 2024. But at the moment, it's just 3-year-olds who live in England are able to access 30 hours of childcare. And again, just to support development with children. It's a brilliant offer that we're able to offer our children in the UK. Now, when looking at a little bit further ahead, so our 4-year-olds, when we look at their development in relation to social and emotional, what we'd be expecting really is that they're able to, pretend to be something when they're playing. So they may, pretend to be a princess, superhero, an animal, that type of thing. Asking to play with other children as well. So if no children are around, there'll be, we'd expect that kind of that social development of them asking to play with other children. Comforts others who are hurt and sad, like hugging a crying friend. So as I said before, when we talked about temper tantrums, when a child, is upset, they kick or, they hurt another child, I should say. The development's very different from a 2-year-old to a 4-year-old. So with a 2-year-old, they're not able to recognise that behaviour might be hurting another child. But at 4, we'd be expecting them to recognise, if a child, they've done that behaviour and it's hurt another child. At this age, they do like to be helpers. So often, nursery teachers will have little helper awards in the classroom. They like that type of thing. It's that positive encouragement as well, that kind of positive reinforcement. Language and communication development. So they may be able to kind of sing songs, nursery rhymes, that type of thing. Talks about at least one thing that's happened during the day. So I played, football, or, we painted a picture. Able to answer simple questions. So for example, what is a coat for? What's a crane for? So they're able to answer those simple questions. In cognition, so when we're looking at those problem solving abilities, they're able to recognise their own name in print. So quite often what nurseries will do is when a child goes into nursery is that they'll have every child's name on a table and the child's got to go in and recognise their name. And that's just a way of promoting that cognition, that kind of cognitive milestone in the kind of 3 to 4-year-old age. So they're able to kind of recognise their own name if they were to see it. They can draw a person, but it's usually a head with legs and arms and some fingers as well. So kind of those potato type drawings with the kind of stick arms and legs at this age. When we look at physical development, so able to hop on one foot and, simple things like able to kind of pour themselves a glass of water, but again, with adult supervision, lots of spills at this age as well. Now, when I worked in clinic, again, we would get lots of questions in relation to sleep problems. And it is normal for 30 to 40% of children between 2 and 5 years old to wake at night. So it can be seen as just a normal part of development and enter the parent's bed. So, parents would come in and say, gosh, they keep waking up at night. But again, a lot of it is reassuring. So that's normal development between 2 and 5 years old, and to put that child back in their own bed and help them get to sleep. Now, one of the common problems that I would see is, so for example, I would have a parent who's had a new baby and and that older child, so for example, they had a 3-year-old, wasn't able to get to sleep without mum, because since that child's been born up to the age of 3, they've always gone to sleep with mum or dad, for example. And they would come to me with new baby to say, what am I going to do? I can't get my 3-year-old to go to sleep without me. So that's kind of a common problem that I would see. And it all starts with self-soothing. So from the early months and the years of life, we recommend for children to be able to self-soothe themselves to sleep. So not rely on somebody to get them to sleep, to learn those skills to be able to go off to sleep by themselves. And one way that you can promote that is with a healthy bedtime routine. So simple things like, that routine of bath, story, bed, making sure everything's quiet in the house around bedtime, making sure all the curtains are drawn. So the brain gets used to these cues that bedtime is coming, I need to start slowing down. It's, so the brain's getting ready to go to bed. So simple bedtime routines can help. And that child learns to drift off to sleep themselves. So they go to bed and they lie down when they're quiet, they're still, they're not hysterical, they're not active, they're nice and quiet, and then you put them down and naturally they'll learn to kind of fall to sleep themselves without their caregiver. So essentially that's what we're kind of trying to promote from the early months, really, that a child's able to go down in that kind of semi-awake state and settle themselves to sleep. But there are lots of things that can contribute to poor sleep. So one of the things that's researched and we know a lot about is that blue screens, so things like mobile phones, iPads, televisions, that blue light can interfere with the melatonin in brains and kind of block those natural sleep hormones. So we do recommend no blue light before bed, a couple of hours before bed. So, take child off iPad, take them from TVs, that type of thing, a couple of hours before bed. So we can really help to induce that kind of natural sleep hormone rather than that interfering or blocking it. Sometimes there's been research into this, that hand-eye coordination can help before bed as well. So if you've got a child that's particularly struggling to get to sleep or go off by themselves, doing things like colouring, that hand to eye, little jigsaw puzzles, or it might be threading beads on a shoestring, something like that. That hand to eye coordination can really help induce that natural sleep hormone, and that can sometimes help get children off to sleep. It is normal when children are starting new routines. So if a new baby comes into the household or a child starts nursery or school, that there can be a disruption in the sleep pattern, and that can be normal, but usually it rectifies itself. And keeping a child's bedroom as dark as possible can sometimes help as well, just to kind of help kind of support those kind of sleep hormones. A lot of parents will swear by blackout blinds, particularly in the spring when we've got a lot of light coming through the bedroom window. So that can definitely help support some children, if they're really struggling with the light in the bedrooms. So, some parents will swear by those as well. But essentially it is just about getting those healthy bedtime routines to get a child off to sleep. Okay, so moving forward to our 5-year-olds, our school ready. At the time a child is 5 years old, what we would be kind of expecting in those developmental milestones are things like follows rules and takes turns when playing with other children, has a friend, may sing, dance or act for you, does simple chores at home. So, we'd be expecting them to clear the table after eating or match socks, those types of things. When we look at language and communication development, we'd be looking at things like answers simple questions in a book or story after you've read it to them, keeps the conversation going with kind of 3 and 4 back exchanges, and able to recognise simple rhymes as well. When we look at cognition, so that problem-solving ability, able to count fingers on one hand, gives full name and age, usually a birthday as well, write some letters in a name and name some letters when you point to them. And when we look at that kind of physical gross motor skills, they're usually quite skilled in more complex tasks. So things like skipping, walking, along the line, those type things. So when we talk about school readiness, there is this expectation that ready for school essentially means that children are reaching a level of development which will enable them to be able to communicate their needs, be independent of eating, getting dressed and going to the toilet, take turns, sit still, listen and play, socialises with peers, have good physical health, including dental health, well nourished and within healthy weight and height range, and having received all childhood immunisations. So when we talk about school ready, essentially those early years from 0 to 5, that's what we're gearing up children to do when it comes to child development. Now, there was a survey done of about 1,000 children, 1,000 school teachers, not children, last year. And the survey showed that about 46% of children were not school ready by the time they started reception. And again, that is just one kind of research kind of output that I had a look at, but there are lots of others out there that demonstrate there are so many children that reach school that are not ready for not ready to start school. What we want is we want children to be able to learn at 2, but we want them ready for school at 5. So that's why there have been a lot more incentives in the UK in relation to those free child places to get children at this point when they start reception, they're ready to get ahead and start learning. And again, it can be difficult. We've got challenges with this, haven't we, when it comes to, when I have a look at kind of dental health on the screen, it's very challenging to find a dentist, particularly in England at the moment, an NHS dentist. Although most CCGs now have places for NHS dentists for children, because we recognise that is an important part of child development and children should be able to access an NHS dentist. Now, where it would be, I don't know whether it would be close to the, to that child's home. Again, there's lots of other different things that can impact on that as well. But essentially, that is what we want to see for our children, to have good physical health and good dental health as well. But again, there's lots of political challenges with that. Now, in England, we have something called the Healthy Child Programme. And this was a document, essentially, which was brought out in 2009. It's had a revisit in 2023. And this is a schedule of interventions, which is the kind of the what a child will receive in relation to screening, immunisations and health checks up until the age of 19. So in England, we have the health visiting programme, which is from children from 0 to 5. When a child gets to 5 years of age, up until 19, they will be under the care of the school nurses. Essentially, what the health visitors will do is review all the records of all the children that they've got on their caseload and pass those details over to the school nurse. And on that crossover between services, what the school nurses will do will review the immunisation schedule for all children and offer any missed immunisations. We offer immunisations in the UK at 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 13 months and 13 months and 2 years, 4 months as well. So again, it depends where you are and where. I know there's lots of people that aren't in England at the moment, but essentially in the UK, that's what we offer. They will review access to primary care to make sure that all children are registered with a GP and dental care as well. They may review appropriate interventions. So if a child's had a developmental problem or a developmental delay, then they'll review development as well at that point. They will provide schools with information in relation to specific health conditions. So, if you had a child that was a diabetic, the school nurse will link in quite closely with school in relation to a care plan for those children and asthmatic children and so forth. They also, when a child goes to reception, around the kind of the 4 to 5 year age, we will look at height and weight of children as well, part of the child measurement programme. And they will have a hearing and visual screen again between 4 and 5 years old, just to double check that there's no underlying disorders or anything that's been missed. So, as clinicians, then, it's important for us to recognise the different factors that impact on development. So, some of those things that I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, physical, genetics, nutrition, family dynamics, all those types of things can impact on development. And children, don't always follow that linear line. It's about getting the right support as well. So if you do have a family that's concerned about development in a child, if it's under 5, you need to be speaking to the health visitors. And if it's over 5, you might want to call in the school nurses, to get some additional support in place for that child, or the GP, if you're not in the UK. It's important to understand when developmental checks are carried out. So routinely for children, we do it between 9 and 12 months, and around 2.5. That's when the general development checks are carried out to make sure that children are reaching milestones. And again, signposting for parental advice, because a lot of the things that we see, like sleep problems, temper tantrums, and that type of thing, is about making sure that parents feel supported to deal with that as well. So you can refer into health visitors if it's a problem with a school-age child in relation to parenting. The school nursing service can direct you in the right area of getting that family some support as well. And again, it depends on what's commissioned in your area, to depend on what type of parenting support that you can access. I've just put some additional resources on here as well. So for those of you who are a bit more interested in when screening happens, or immunisations, or what type of health checks happen at different times, in England, we use the Healthy Child programme. There is a link for e-learning for healthcare there. Really easy little resource to use. Definitely recommend kind of saving it in your favourites, and you can click on the link and it will show you, what to expect for screening at that age. For a lot of the developmental milestones I've used for this presentation, I've used the Sharma and Cockrell Birth to 5-Year book, which was highly recommended in health visiting, and by kind of senior colleagues, senior lecturers, and that type of thing. And again, if you're looking for any kind of charity organisations in relation to signposting to parental support, the NSPCC is a brilliant website. It's got loads of helpful advice, hints and tips on parents if they're struggling with, temper tantrums and all the things that go with small children.